Marcus Johnson sat quietly in his seat on Flight 247, gazing out of the small airplane window at the bustling tarmac below. The morning sun cast long shadows across the ground, and the hum of engines filled the air. It was going to be a long flight from Atlanta to San Francisco, but Marcus didn't mind. He had brought his laptop along, planning to use the 6 hours to catch up on some work emails. As the last few passengers boarded, Marcus adjusted his headphones and leaned back into his chair. He liked flying. It gave him time to think, away from the noise and distractions of daily life. But today felt different. Something about this flight seemed off, though he couldn't quite put his finger on it yet. The sound of footsteps down the narrow aisle pulled him out of his thoughts. A young woman in a crisp navy blue uniform approached, smiling politely at the passengers around him. Her name tag read, Laura. She stopped near Marcus's row and greeted the older couple sitting across the aisle before turning her attention to him. "Good morning," Laura said brightly. "Can I get you anything before we take off?" Marcus removed one earbud and looked up at her. His voice carried a rich southern drawl, warm and melodic. "Morning. Could you tell me what meals y'all got available?" For a moment there was silence. Laura blinked, seemingly caught off guard. Then, instead of answering right away, she tilted her head slightly, her smile faltering. Sorry, could you repeat that?" Marcus frowned, unsure why she hadn't understood him. He spoke clearly, enunciating each word. "I asked about the meals y'all are serving." This time Laura let out a short laugh, though it sounded forced. "Oh, okay, let me check." She glanced over her shoulder toward another flight attendant standing further down the aisle, a tall man with sandy hair named Ryan. Ryan raised an eyebrow when he saw Laura looking his way. "What's up?" he mouthed silently. Laura turned back to Marcus, still smiling, but now with a hint of mockery creeping into her tone. "Just give me a second," she said, dragging out the words as if speaking to someone who might not understand. "English well." Marcus clenched his jaw but said nothing. He wasn't surprised by reactions like this. He'd dealt with similar attitudes his whole life. People often judged him based on his accent, assuming it meant he was less educated or less capable. But being treated this way on a plane where everyone should feel equal stung more than usual. He watched as Laura walked away, chatting quietly with Ryan. They both glanced back at him briefly before bursting into quiet laughter. Another flight, attendant Jessica joined them, leaning in to hear what they were saying. From the snippets Marcus could overhear, it was clear they were making fun of him. "Did you hear that accent?" Ryan whispered loudly enough for nearby passengers to hear. "It's like, what century is he from?" Jessica giggled, covering her mouth with her hand. "Maybe he thinks we're serving grits and fried chicken," she joked, earning more snickers from the group. Marcus sank lower in his seat, pretending not to notice. He focused on pulling out his laptop, hoping to distract himself. As he typed in his password, he noticed a few other passengers glancing at him sympathetically. An older woman 2 rows ahead shook her head disapprovingly at the flight attendant's behavior, while a teenage boy sitting next to her leaned over to whisper something to his mother. Despite trying to ignore the situation, Marcus couldn't help feeling angry. These people worked for the airline. They were supposed to treat all passengers with respect, regardless of how they spoke or where they came from. Yet here they were, gossiping and laughing behind his back like school children. The plane began moving slowly toward the runway, jolting Marcus out of his thoughts. He buckled his seatbelt tightly, gripping the armrests as the engines roared to life. Normally he enjoyed takeoffs, the rush of acceleration, the sensation of lifting off the ground. But today, he just wanted the flight to be over. As the aircraft climbed higher into the sky, Marcus opened his email inbox and scrolled through the unread messages. One subject line caught his eye. Urgent, appointment confirmation, interim CEO of Skyline Airlines. His heart skipped a beat. This was it, the official confirmation he'd been waiting for. After years of hard work and dedication, he had finally been chosen to lead one of the largest airlines in the country, at least temporarily. But as Marcus read through the details, His excitement faded. How ironic, he thought bitterly, that his first experience as CEO would involve dealing with employees mocking him because of the way he talked. If only Laura, Ryan, and Jessica knew who he really was, maybe they'd think twice before cracking jokes at his expense. Still, Marcus decided to wait until the right moment to reveal his identity. For now, he needed to stay calm and focus on the bigger picture. Being angry wouldn't solve anything, it would only make things worse. So he closed his laptop, took a deep breath and stared out the window again, watching the clouds drift past. Little did the flight attendants know, their actions had set something in motion that would change their lives forever. By the end of this flight, none of them would forget the name Marcus Johnson, or the lesson he was about to teach them. As the plane soared through the sky, Marcus Johnson sat quietly in his seat, trying to focus on something, anything, other than the mocking comments he'd endured earlier. But no matter how hard he tried, the words kept replaying in his mind. Ryan's snide remark about what century he was from, Jessica's joke about grits and fried chicken, Laura's exaggerated tone when pretending not to understand him. It wasn't just their words that bothered him. It was the way they acted like he wasn't even there, like he didn't matter. That stung more than anything else. Marcus sighed deeply and glanced around the cabin. Most passengers seemed oblivious to the tension brewing at the front of the plane. Some were sleeping, others reading or watching movies on their screens. A few had noticed the whispers and smirks exchanged between the flight attendants but chose to stay out of it. Then, as if to remind himself of what he was capable of, Marcus reopened his laptop and reread the email confirming his appointment as interim CEO of Skyline Airlines. It felt surreal, almost like fate had placed him on this exact flight for a reason. Maybe it was a chance to prove a point, not just to the disrespectful crew, but to everyone who ever doubted him because of his accent or where he came from. He closed the laptop again and looked toward the front of the plane. Laura, Ryan, and Jessica were still chatting amongst themselves, occasionally glancing back at him with knowing smiles. They probably thought they were being clever, making fun of him without getting caught. What they didn't know was that Marcus had every intention of catching them and holding them accountable. After a few moments of deliberation, Marcus stood up. He straightened his shirt, took a deep breath, and walked toward the galley area near the front of the cabin. Standing there was Sarah, the lead flight attendant, organizing refreshments for the upcoming drink service. She looked up as Marcus approached, her brow furrowing slightly in confusion. "Excuse me," Marcus said calmly. "Do you have a moment? I need to speak with you privately." Sarah hesitated, clearly unsure what to make of his request. "Sure, is everything okay?" "It will be," Marcus replied, his voice steady. "But we do need to talk." Sarah nodded and gestured for him to follow her into a small corner of the galley, away from prying eyes. Once they were alone, she turned to face him, crossing her arms over her chest. "What's going on?" "My name is Marcus Johnson," he began, meeting her gaze directly. "And starting today, I've been appointed as the interim CEO of Skyline Airlines." Sarah's eyes widened in surprise. She opened her mouth to say something but stopped herself, clearly taken aback by his announcement. "I'm telling you this," Marcus continued, "because I want you to understand why I'm bringing this up. Earlier, your team, specifically Laura, Ryan, and Jessica, made some inappropriate comments about my accent. They mocked me in front of other passengers, and frankly, that kind of behavior is unacceptable." Sarah's face paled as she realized the gravity of the situation. She shifted uncomfortably, avoiding eye contact. I don't know what to say. I didn't hear any of that myself, but you're aware of the culture on this flight," Marcus interrupted gently. "You saw how they acted. You heard their laughter and you didn't step in to stop it." Sarah swallowed hard, guilt flickering across her features. "Look, I'm sorry if anyone offended you. I can talk to them, make sure it doesn't happen. Again, that won't be necessary," Marcus said firmly. "Because effective immediately, Laura, Ryan, and Jessica are fired. You can inform them once we land." The words hit Sarah like a punch to the gut. She stared at Marcus, speechless. her mind racing to process what he'd just said. Firing employees mid-flight? Was that even allowed? "They'll be escorted off the plane as soon as we touch down," Marcus added, his tone leaving no room for argument. "And let this serve as a reminder to everyone on your team. Discrimination has no place at Skyline Airlines, not under my leadership." With that, Marcus turned and walked back to his seat, leaving Sarah frozen in place. For a few seconds, she simply stood there, trying to wrap her head around what had just happened. Then, reluctantly, she made her way to the group of offending flight attendants. Laura, Ryan, and Jessica were laughing about something when Sarah arrived. Their smiles faded instantly when they saw the look on her face. "We need to talk," Sarah said tersely, motioning for them to follow her to a quieter part of the cabin. "What's going on?" Laura asked, her voice tinged with nervousness. Sarah hesitated, unsure how to break the news. Finally, she blurted it out. "That passenger you were joking about earlier, turns out he's the new CEO of the company." The color drained from Laura's face. Ryan's jaw dropped and Jessica gasped audibly. "No way," Ryan muttered, shaking his head in disbelief. "There's no way." "It's true," Sarah snapped. "He confronted me about it, and now he's firing all three of you. Effective. Immediately." Panic set in as the reality of the situation sank in. Laura started stammering, trying to defend herself. "We were just joking around. We didn't mean anything by it." "Well, apparently he did," Sarah shot back. "So, pack your stuff and get ready to leave the plane once we land. Don't make a scene." The trio exchanged horrified looks, realizing their careers were crumbling right before their eyes. Meanwhile, word of what had happened began spreading among the remaining crew members. Some whispered sympathetically about the fired attendants, while others expressed quiet relief that the toxic behavior was finally being addressed. Passengers overheard fragments of the drama unfolding and started speculating. An elderly woman leaned over to her husband and said, "Good riddance. People like that shouldn't be working in customer service." Others nodded in agreement, grateful that someone had finally stood up to such blatant disrespect. Back in the cockpit, Captain Harold monitored the situation closely. When air traffic control relayed a message from corporate headquarters asking for updates, Harold knew things were escalating quickly. News of the incident had already leaked online, sparking heated discussions across social media platforms. Hashtags like #RespectAllPassengers trended nationwide, with users praising Marcus's swift action. Despite the growing tension aboard the flight, Marcus remained calm and focused. He pulled out his laptop once more, drafting a statement to release to the public after landing. In it, he emphasized zero tolerance for prejudice and promised sweeping reforms within Skyline Airlines to ensure incidents like this never happened again. For Marcus, it wasn't about revenge or proving a point. It was about sending a clear message. Respect mattered. Everyone deserved to be treated with dignity, regardless of their background or how they spoke. And as the newly appointed CEO, he intended to lead by example. As the plane cruised steadily toward San Francisco, Marcus couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction. Yes, standing up to injustice was difficult, but it was also necessary. By addressing the issue head-on, he hoped to inspire others to do the same. When Flight 247 eventually touched down, reporters swarmed the gate, eager to learn more about the drama that had unfolded mid-air. Cameras flashed as Marcus disembarked, his presence commanding attention. Laura, Ryan, and Jessica exited separately, escorted by security, their faces flushed with shame. Their dismissals became official moments later, setting a powerful precedent for accountability within the airline industry. Under Marcus's leadership, Skyline Airlines would soar to new heights, not just in profits but in integrity and respect for all. The news spread like wildfire through the plane. Passengers whispered to each other, piecing together bits of information they'd overheard from the crew. Some were outraged by what Laura, Ryan, and Jessica had done. Others felt sympathy for Marcus, who had been mocked simply because of how he spoke. Marcus returned to his seat after speaking with Sarah, the lead flight attendant. He could feel the weight of dozens of eyes on him as he sat down. People were curious, wondering who this quiet man was and why the crew seemed so shaken. An elderly woman seated nearby leaned over slightly and said softly, "Young man, whatever you just did, I think it's about time someone stood up to those rude folks." Marcus smiled faintly at her comment but didn't respond. He appreciated the support even if it came from strangers. Still, he knew that standing up to injustice wasn't easy. It required courage, patience, and sometimes sacrifice. And while Marcus didn't seek recognition or praise, he understood that moments like these carried meaning beyond himself. As the hours passed, the tension aboard Flight 247 remained palpable. Laura, Ryan, and Jessica avoided eye contact with passengers clearly embarrassed by the situation. They moved quietly through the cabin, offering drinks and snacks without their usual cheerfulness. It was clear they knew their jobs were already lost. They were simply going through the motions until landing. Meanwhile, Sarah, the lead flight attendant, struggled to maintain order among the remaining staff. She gathered the team in the galley and gave them a stern warning. "Whatever happens next, we need to keep things professional. No more jokes, no more mocking anyone. If I hear one more inappropriate comment, you'll all be joining your colleagues on the unemployment line." Her words silenced the group, but resentment simmered beneath the surface. Some of the flight attendants muttered under their breath, blaming Marcus for causing trouble. Others, however, nodded in agreement, acknowledging that the behavior of their coworkers had crossed a line. In the cockpit, Captain Harold monitored the situation closely. He received another message from corporate headquarters, urging him to ensure a smooth landing despite the chaos unfolding on board. Harold sighed heavily, knowing full well that this flight would go down in company history, not necessarily for its turbulence, but for the drama playing out inside the cabin. Back in his seat, Marcus opened his laptop again. He wanted to use the remaining time wisely, drafting plans for his first official actions as interim CEO. One idea stood out clearly in his mind: mandatory diversity training for all employees. Too often, companies paid lip service to inclusivity without taking concrete steps to address discrimination. Marcus intended to change that. He also decided to establish a hotline where passengers and employees alike could report incidents of bias or mistreatment. Transparency and accountability would become the cornerstones of his leadership. After all, an airline thrived not just on efficiency or profits, but on trust. The trust that every passenger would be treated with dignity and respect. While Marcus worked, the passengers around him couldn't help but notice the shift in energy throughout the plane. The earlier mockery and snide remarks had vanished, replaced by an awkward silence. Even the teenagers in the back row who had been laughing loudly earlier now spoke in hushed tones. One young mother traveling with her son leaned over to whisper to her neighbor, "Do you think it's true? Is that guy really the new boss?" Her neighbor shrugged. "If he is, I hope he cleans house. Airlines need people who care about customers, not clowns making fun of accents." Word of the incident continued to spread outside the plane as well. Social media platforms lit up with posts about the confrontation. Hashtags like "Respect All Passengers" trended nationwide, with users sharing stories of similar experiences they'd endured while traveling. Many praised Marcus for taking a stand, while others criticized the airline industry for allowing such behavior to persist unchecked. By the time the plane began its descent into San Francisco, anticipation filled the air. Passengers peered out the windows, eager to see the city skyline emerge from the fog. But for Marcus, the arrival signified something deeper: a fresh start, not just for himself, but for Skyline Airlines as a whole. When the wheels touched down, on the runway, applause broke out in the cabin, a customary gesture for a safe landing. However, this time, the cheers carried an extra layer of meaning. Several passengers clapped louder than usual, glancing toward Marcus as if to silently thank him for what he'd done. As the plane taxied to the gate, reporters swarmed the jet bridge, cameras flashing wildly. News of the mid-flight drama had reached the press and everyone wanted answers. Who was this mysterious passenger-turned-CEO? What changes would he bring to the company? Captain Harold stepped off the plane first, followed by the flight attendants. Laura, Ryan, and Jessica walked solemnly behind Sarah, escorted by security personnel. Their heads hung low, avoiding the glare of cameras and the judgmental stares of fellow passengers. Finally, it was Marcus's turn to disembark. As he stepped into the terminal, the crowd erupted into cheers. Reporters shouted questions at him, vying for his attention. "Mr. Johnson, can you confirm you fired 3 employees mid-flight? How does it feel to take over as CEO during such a controversial moment? What reforms do you plan to implement moving forward?" Marcus raised a hand to signal for quiet. When the noise settled, he addressed the crowd in a steady, confident voice. "I'm here today not to celebrate myself, but to remind everyone that respect matters," he said. "No one should ever be made to feel less than human because of their accent, their appearance, or where they come from. Starting today, Skyline Airlines will prioritize inclusivity, transparency, and accountability. We owe it to our passengers and employees to create a better environment for everyone." His words earned thunderous applause from the bystanders. Many nodded approvingly, impressed by his poise and determination. Behind the scenes, corporate executives scrambled to respond to the public outcry. Statements poured in from senior leaders, pledging support for Marcus's vision and promising swift action to address systemic issues within the company. For Marcus, the journey was only beginning. He knew that leading a major airline wouldn't be easy. There would be challenges ahead, resistance to change, and difficult decisions to make. But he also knew that standing up for what was right mattered more than anything else. As he walked away from the cameras and reporters, Marcus felt a renewed sense of purpose. This wasn't just about firing a few disrespectful employees. It was about setting a standard for kindness, fairness, and respect. And if his actions inspired others to do the same, then every moment of discomfort, every ounce of effort would be worth it. The moment Marcus Johnson stepped off Flight 247, the world seemed to hold its breath. Reporters jostled for position, their cameras flashing like strobe lights in the crowded terminal. Passengers lingered nearby, eager to catch a glimpse of the man who had stood up to discrimination mid-flight. For many, this wasn't just another news story. It was a turning point, a rare instance where someone used their power to make things right. Marcus paused briefly before addressing the crowd. He adjusted his tie, took a deep breath, and looked directly into the sea of microphones pointed at him. His voice carried authority, yet it remained warm and approachable. "Thank you all for being here," he began. "Today, I want to talk about something bigger than me or this flight. It's about respect for every passenger, every employee, and every human being who steps onto one of our planes." He went on to explain what had happened during the flight, sparing no detail. He described how Laura, Ryan, and Jessica had mocked him because of his accent, how their behavior undermined the values Skyline Airlines claimed to uphold. Then, without hesitation, he confirmed their immediate dismissal. "This isn't about revenge," Marcus emphasized. "It's about accountability. If we allow disrespectful behavior to go unchecked, we fail not only our customers but also ourselves. Moving forward, Skyline Airlines will take a zero-tolerance stance against discrimination in any form." His words resonated deeply with the audience. Passengers nodded approvingly, while reporters scribbled notes furiously. Social media feeds exploded with reactions, as Marcus's statement reached millions within minutes. Hashtags like "Respect all passengers" continued to trend, accompanied by messages of support for his bold actions. Behind the scenes, corporate executives scrambled to align themselves with Marcus's vision. Statements were issued praising his leadership and promising reforms across the company. Board members held emergency meetings to discuss policy changes, knowing that public perception could either lift or sink the airline. For Laura, Ryan, and Jessica, the aftermath was devastating. Escorted off the plane under the watchful eyes of security, they avoided looking at anyone. Their faces were pale, their expressions a mix of shock and shame. As they passed through the terminal, passengers whispered harshly among themselves. Some even booed softly, venting their frustration at the trio's behavior. Once outside the airport, the flight attendants huddled together, trying to process what had just happened. Laura buried her face in her hands, tears streaming down her cheeks. "This can't be real," she muttered. "We were just joking around." Ryan shook his head angrily. "Joking? You call mocking someone's accent joking? We got exactly what we deserved." Jessica remained silent, staring blankly ahead. She knew Ryan was right. They had crossed a line, and now they were paying the price. Back inside the terminal, Marcus greeted passengers as they exited the plane. Many stopped to shake his hand or thank him personally. One elderly woman hugged him tightly, saying, "You've given us hope that things can change." A teenage boy approached nervously, holding out his phone. "Can I get a picture with you?" he asked shyly. Marcus smiled warmly. "Of course." As the photo was taken, the boy grinned from ear to ear. "My mom says you're a hero," he said before running back to his family. Despite the praise, Marcus didn't see himself as a hero. To him, this was simply the right thing to do. He believed that everyone deserved to be treated with dignity, regardless of their background or how they spoke. And if standing up for that principle inspired others to do the same, then his actions were worth it. Later that evening, Marcus sat in a quiet conference room at Skyline Airlines headquarters. Before him lay stacks of documents outlining the company's policies, procedures, and employee records. It was overwhelming, but he tackled it with determination. First on his agenda was implementing mandatory diversity training for all employees. Marcus envisioned sessions led by experts in cultural sensitivity, designed to help staff recognize unconscious biases and foster empathy. He also planned to introduce workshops where employees could share their own experiences of discrimination, creating a space for open dialogue and understanding. Next, he focused on establishing a hotline for reporting incidents of bias or mistreatment. This initiative aimed to provide both passengers and employees with a safe way to voice concerns without fear of retaliation. Calls would be handled by an independent team trained to investigate complaints thoroughly and fairly. Finally, Marcus wanted to revamp the hiring process to ensure greater inclusivity. By partnering with organizations that supported underrepresented communities, Skyline Airlines could attract diverse talent and create a workforce reflective of its customer base. Word of these plans spread quickly, earning widespread approval. Employees expressed relief that the company was finally addressing long-standing issues, while passengers praised Marcus's commitment to meaningful change. However, not everyone welcomed his reforms. Some senior managers resisted the idea of mandatory training, arguing that it would disrupt operations and cost too much money. Others grumbled privately about Marcus's abrupt rise to power, questioning whether he was truly qualified for the role. But Marcus refused to let criticism deter him. He understood that change often came with resistance, especially when it challenged deeply ingrained habits and attitudes. Instead of backing down, he doubled his efforts, meeting with department heads to explain the importance of his initiatives. "You can't put a price tag on respect," he told them. "If we invest in our people now, we'll build a stronger, more united company in the long run." Slowly but surely, his persistence paid off. Managers began to see the value in his proposals, recognizing that a culture of inclusivity would benefit everyone, not just marginalized groups. Meanwhile, the public response to Marcus's actions continued to grow. News outlets hailed him as a trailblazer, a leader unafraid to challenge the status quo. Opinion pieces praised his courage, while social media users shared personal stories of discrimination they'd faced while traveling. One post stood out in particular. A young woman wrote, "I'll never forget the time a flight attendant laughed at my hijab. Seeing Marcus stand up for himself gives me hope that maybe, just maybe, things are starting to change." Reading such messages filled Marcus with pride, but also humility. He knew there was still so much work to be done. Changing an entire industry wouldn't happen overnight, but every step mattered. By the end of the week, Marcus had settled into his new role as interim CEO. Though the journey ahead promised challenges, he felt ready to face them head-on. With determination, compassion, and a steadfast belief in doing what was right, he vowed to lead Skyline Airlines toward a brighter future, a future built on respect, integrity, and equality for all. Months passed since Marcus Johnson became the interim CEO of Skyline Airlines, and the changes he implemented began to take root throughout the company. What started as a single act of standing up against discrimination on Flight 247 had grown into a movement, a mission to reshape not just one airline but an entire industry. The diversity training sessions Marcus introduced quickly became mandatory for all employees, from flight attendants to pilots to ground staff. Led by experts in cultural sensitivity, these workshops encourage participants to reflect on their biases and learn how to treat everyone with kindness and respect. Stories shared during the sessions highlighted real-life examples of discrimination and its impact, leaving many attendees emotional yet inspired to do better. One particularly powerful session featured a former passenger who recounted being mocked for her traditional attire during a previous flight. Her voice trembled as she described feeling humiliated in front of strangers. But when she finished speaking, the room erupted in applause. Many employees approached her afterward to thank her for sharing her story, promising to be more mindful in their interactions moving forward. The hotline Marcus established also proved to be a success. Within weeks, dozens of calls poured in, ranging from reports of rude behavior to suggestions for improving customer service. Each complaint was investigated thoroughly, and corrective actions were taken swiftly. Employees found guilty of misconduct faced consequences, reinforcing the message that disrespect would no longer be tolerated. To further promote inclusivity, Marcus partnered with organizations dedicated to supporting underrepresented communities. Through these partnerships, Skyline Airlines launched recruitment campaigns targeting candidates from diverse backgrounds. The goal was simple: to create a workforce that reflected the rich tapestry of humanity boarding their planes every day. The reforms gained momentum, so did public support for Marcus's leadership. Passengers praised the improved service, noting how much friendlier and more attentive the crew seemed. Social media buzzed with positive reviews, with hashtags like Skyline Cares trending alongside Respect All Passengers. One frequent traveler tweeted, "Flying with Skyline feels different now, like they actually care about us." Corporate executives, once skeptical of Marcus's initiatives, now sang his praises. Board members credited him with revitalizing the company's image and boosting employee morale. Even those who initially resisted change admitted they were wrong, acknowledging that Marcus's vision had brought new life to the struggling airline. But perhaps the most profound impact was felt among the employees themselves. For years, many had worked in an environment where discriminatory behavior went unchecked, leaving them disillusioned and disengaged. Now, with clear policies in place and a leader committed to fairness, they felt empowered to speak up and make a difference. Take Emily, for example, a flight attendant based in Chicago. Before Marcus took over, she often heard colleagues making insensitive jokes about passengers' accents or appearances. She never joined in but rarely spoke out either, fearing backlash. After attending the diversity training, however, Emily found her voice. When she overheard a coworker teasing another passenger about their clothing, Emily stepped in immediately. "That's not okay," she said firmly. "We're here to serve people, not judge them." Her courage inspired others to follow suit. Slowly but surely, a culture of accountability began to emerge, one conversation at a time. Marcus didn't stop there. He knew that true transformation required ongoing effort, so he scheduled regular check-ins with department heads to assess progress and address any lingering issues. These meetings weren't just about numbers or metrics. They were opportunities to listen, to understand what was working and what still needed improvement. During one such meeting, a pilot named David raised a concern. "Some of the older employees are struggling to adapt to the new policies," he explained. "They mean well, but old habits die hard. Maybe we could offer additional coaching for those who need extra guidance." Marcus nodded thoughtfully. "That's a great idea. Let's set up a mentorship program where seasoned employees can work closely with trainers to reinforce the values we're trying to instill." The suggestion was implemented within days, further solidifying Marcus's reputation as a leader who listened and acted. Outside the company, Marcus's influence continued to grow. Invitations poured in for him to speak at conferences and events, focused on workplace equality and leadership. At each appearance, he emphasized the importance of leading with empathy and integrity. When you treat people with respect, he told audiences, you don't just change their day, you change their lives. And sometimes changing someone's life starts with something as simple as listening. His speeches resonated deeply, earning standing ovations wherever he went. Media outlets dubbed him the CEO who changed the skies, highlighting his role in redefining what it meant to lead in the modern era. Despite the accolades, Marcus remained humble. He understood that the journey was far from over, that there would always be challenges to face and lessons to learn. But he also knew that every step forward mattered, no matter how small. One evening, as he sat alone in his office reviewing reports, Marcus allowed himself a moment of reflection. He thought about the passengers he'd met along the way, the elderly woman who hugged him after the flight, the teenage boy who called him a hero, the young woman who thanked him for giving her hope. Their stories reminded him why he fought so hard for change. He also thought about Laura, Ryan, and Jessica, the flight attendants whose mockery had sparked this entire chain of events. While their actions had been hurtful, Marcus didn't harbor resentment toward them. Instead, he hoped they had learned from their mistakes and grown as individuals. By the time Marcus left the office that night, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to make a difference, and he was ready. Under Marcus's leadership, Skyline Airlines soared to unprecedented heights, not just financially, but morally. Customer satisfaction ratings reached record levels, and employee engagement soared. The airline became a shining example of what could happen when compassion and accountability guided decision-making. For Marcus, the greatest reward wasn't the title of CEO or the praise from colleagues and strangers alike. It was knowing that he had helped create a world where everyone, regardless of their background or accent, could feel valued and respected. And as planes bearing the Skyline logo crisscrossed the skies, carrying passengers to destinations near and far, Marcus's legacy lived on, a testament to the power of standing up for what is right even when it's hard.